Please welcome our next panelist, Rags to Riches over Redistribution, Uplifting the Forgotten American.
All right, everybody. Scott Winship is AWOL, which is very unlike him because he was our very first scholar at FREOPP, so I'm definitely going to give him a hard time. My text thing has a ... so I don't know if that means he's giving me an update, but we'll make do. We'll make do without Mr. Winship for now and see if he pipes in later. I'm really blessed to be here with Les Ford and Adam Millsap, who both have a great amount of experience on this topic. And you know, as you know, if you know anything about the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, this is something we've, of course, dedicated ourselves to, this idea of freedom and its role in driving social mobility and improving opportunity for those who least have it. So, a topic close to my heart. I'm going to start with you, Les, because you have a wide range of experience. You've worked on Capitol Hill, you've worked in the White House, you worked in the think tank world. What are you seeing out there? Have we figured out how to increase social mobility?
Definitely not yet. I think when we're looking at increasing social mobility, we have to start by looking at the bottom quartile, the bottom quintile, however you want to define it. The market does a pretty good job of those in the middle. And if you look at Scott Winship's work, I wish he was here, he would tell you we've done actually a great job at moving the lower middle income into the higher middle income class. But for those stuck at the bottom, those dependent on the safety net, they're actually quite stuck there because they're dependent on the safety net. They live at the edge of deprivation. And that's because our safety net doesn't work. It isn't a safety net at all, it's kind of a web. It's, depending how you count it, 114 programs over 11 different categories. And if you happen to fall into the safety net, if you fall into a time of crisis, it's incredibly difficult to get out because we don't focus on work attachment. Now, we had an incredible movement forward just in the last year with HR 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill, whatever you want to call it. And our two biggest programs, Medicaid and SNAP, we reinstituted those work requirements. And that will bring our safety net a little bit smaller, so we'll be able to focus on reforming the rest of the programs, the rest of the 112 means-tested programs. So I think we're in a good spot to progress forward, but there's a lot of work ahead of us. So I think we have a lot of work ahead of us.
The title of our panel is, part of the title of our panel is The Forgotten American. Do you feel that there are people who are being forgotten by the public policy world? And by that I specifically mean think tanks, Congress, the White House. Are there people that are just being ignored right now? Or are we actually not ignoring them, just implementing bad policies that address their issues?
I would say we're not necessarily ignoring them, we're not treating them the way we should. I would say the left generally tends to just want to throw a lot of money at them. If you were to ask someone on the left, what should we do about the forgotten American? What should we do about someone who is a low-income American? They would be like, UBI, let's just throw a lot of money at them. AI is coming. And if you were asked someone who's on maybe the very far right, they would be like, throw a work requirement at them. And I agree, I am all for work requirements, so I'm not saying that's the wrong answer. But we have to understand that the safety net as it's been created is over 100 years old. We have now 3 generations of the worst incentives that we have baked into this pie, so that 1 in 4 children in America are raised in a single parent home. Just to put that in context, the worldwide average is 7%. The next closest country is the UK at 18%. We are wildly beyond the average. We have created devastation in this country in our safety net. And that isn't just cultural norms. In America, we tend to, talk right, or talk left, live right. College-educated women do not experience this. Only 9% of college-educated women have a non-marital birth. 61% of women who have less than a high school education have a non-marital birth. So we have created this devastation. It's not just work attachment, it's family formation. And I don't think we focus enough on that. There's family formation, there's work attachment, and those have created a devastation that's not just economic, it's also cultural.
Okay, one more question for you, Les, because you just touched on something really interesting, which is, there's people have been talking about the decline in family formation, the breakdown of the family for a very long time. I've got a lot of gray hair, and I remember people talking about this in the 80s. It's Patrick Moynihan, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, in the, when was that, 75, 60s? Whenever he wrote that famous paper on the fall of the black family and got pilloried for it, that was like 60 years ago. So people have been talking about this for a very, very long time, and our friends in the NatCon world say, oh, well, let's follow the Hungary model. Let's subsidize family formation. That hasn't seemed to work either. Hungary family formation is quite low, actually lower than America's. So are there policies that you've observed that can actually have an impact on family formation, reverse some of the trends we've been seeing?
Okay, so that you brought up
Sorry, I had to ask you the hard question.
Yeah, you brought up something incredibly difficult because it's family formation. If you want to raise the birth rate, it begins with marriage. I think if you've been on Twitter, I'm so sorry. This has been a debate on Twitter for months. And I think it comes down to, if you want more children, you have to have more marriages. That's just the fact of the matter. I have 4 kids. No woman wants to raise a bunch of children alone. She wants to have the father of her children next to her. The safety net used to make it possible for a woman to have some children alone. It was a terrible situation for those women, and over the past 20 years, they stopped having children alone. That is an understandable reaction to an economic, a cultural, a lived reality. So, if you want more children, you have to have more marriage. Marriage has declined drastically. If you look at millennials, I think it's something, I don't have the numbers in my head right now, but if you're looking at, I think it's like a third or half of millennials are expected to never get married. It might be something around 40%. Please fact check me on that. We're not expected to get married. That's just the fact of the matter. And you can't throw money at this problem. I apologize to anyone in the room who disagrees with me, but a $2,000 tax credit is not going to incentivize someone to get married or have a child. When we look at the actual data of what incentivizes someone to get married young or have a child, it's faith, it's community. And if you look at the people who are having children in America, it's practicing Jewish people, it's practicing Catholics, it's practicing Mormons, it's practicing Amish people. It's a cultural revolution. And now it doesn't just have to be religious, but it is primarily religious people. That's what the data says. So I can't say that that is the only path forward, but it tends to be community and faith, people who are having families.
Great. That's as good of an answer as one could hope for. All right, Adam. One thing that's we had Brian obviously speaking here earlier, and we're grateful for Stand Together's sponsorship of this conference. I remember when the rebrand happened, when the various enterprises rebranded as Stand Together, and the whole idea was, hey, we're going to focus on social mobility. This is what we're going to rally around. This is going to become the essence of everything we do. So I don't remember what year that was, but I want to say it was like 5 years or so ago. How's it been going? Do you feel like that cultural change has happened? And how would you say, as an organization, your work has evolved as a result of that? And tell us who you think is forgotten in the American public policy discourse.
Yeah, well, thank you, Avik. That's definitely something we talk about a lot. It's actually probably good that Scott's not here because I would have been redundant, because everything I know about social mobility I mostly get from Scott. So I will maybe echo some of his talking points. But I think when we talk about social mobility, first of all, like when we say we can increase it, I think sometimes we have the baseline wrong. Like this is something that Scott points out a lot. I mean, we talk about, Raj Chetty has this stat that's very popular, like it's a coin flip about whether you're going to do better than your parents, right? And then Scott finds that actually it's like a 75% chance, right? 75% of people do better than their parents, in absolute mobility, even higher, depending on how you do the measure and stuff like that. So I think in like absolute mobility terms, like people do end up doing better than their parents a lot of times, especially once they hit like middle age. The relative mobility, I think, like you're saying, like what income quintile you move to, that's debatable about how much that's improved, and our levels are lower than they are in some Scandinavian countries and Europe and stuff like that. So there's probably room for improvement there. But think about immigration, though. right? If we factor that in, and that's one thing we don't, and someone else has brought that up, right? I think Tyler Cowan actually brought this up, right? If you think about immigrants coming over from America, they actually do really well, much better than they would have done if they would have stayed in their own country. That doesn't get factored really into the mobility statistics when we think about mobility in the U.S. So clearly people can come here and succeed if they have the drive and stuff like that. So I think there's definitely policies we can change, and happy to discuss those. But I don't think the state of mobility in this country is that dire when you look at the numbers. And I do think, going back to, I don't want to keep but I was going to go back to the cultural point you're talking about, right? I think there's a cultural problem here in this country when it comes to mobility, and I'll lay this on men, especially men from the Midwest. I'm from Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, right? J.D. Vance territory. Here we go, right? And so I guess for me, are they the forgotten man? I don't know. We talk about it a lot. It doesn't seem like they're that forgotten. I mean, they show up all the time in the news and politicians and stuff like that. I don't think they're necessarily doing the things they need to do to help them. But I don't think they're forgotten. And I think some of this is on them. The tough love kind of story. You go to places like Dayton, Ohio. There's a ton of help wanted signs. My sister works for a company that installs like commercial fire alarms and fire suppression systems and stuff like that. And they're always looking for techs. These are jobs that pay like $70,000 a year in a place where you can buy a house for $150,000, and they can't find workers. They can't find people who can pass drug tests and come in and have this job. So when I hear these kind of stories about the manufacturing left and there's no jobs in Dayton, Ohio, or Cleveland, or wherever else, like I said, my experience on the ground and the people I talk to, I don't see it.
Yeah, I can echo that because I know a lot of people who work in manufacturing on the industries that are part of, who are running companies in the manufacturing sector, and what they say, at least to me, and this is overwhelmingly consistent. I think every single CEO or investor in the space will say, like, we have way more openings than we have applicants who can pass a drug test and will show up 9 to 5 and not be truant. And then, and so some people say, well, just raise their wages. And they're like, look, we're paying $25 an hour. We're still not actually finding the workers. So that's at least what they're saying. Whether they're right or wrong, I don't know. But there's certainly a lot of official statistics that say there are more job openings than there are people unemployed. So if that's true, then maybe social mobility is not as repressed as the title of our panel would suggest.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some of that, but I think this cultural issue matters too. That Les was getting on, right? We need an optimistic culture that's like forward-looking and think things are going to get better. My friend, and some of you guys may know him, Christos Makarides, he probably should be here. He published a paper recently looking at Gallup survey data, finding that when people are more optimistic about the future, fertility rates are higher, which makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, if you're going to have kids, it's a big commitment. You're looking forward. How do you think the world's going to be? And so I think some of it could be, overcoming this pessimism. We were just talking about in the last speaker, right, Ramesh. So overcoming this pessimism and being optimistic about the future, that's what makes people want to have kids. If you think the country is going to hell, then why would you want to bring another person into it?
And to your point earlier, immigration is fundamentally an optimistic act, right? If you're going to leave your network behind and come to a completely new country, you're doing it because you believe there are going to be more opportunities in that country, and you're taking a lot of risks to do so. So that's going to predispose you or select for that kind of a person. Go ahead, Les, you wanted to pipe in.
No, I was just going to point out something that is optimistic, is the number of young men in the Gen Z category who are actually looking forward to marriage, and marriage actually makes you more job ready. And so I like looking for things that are optimistic. And so while we have 7 million men out of work right now who are not looking for work, we're not looking to engage in the workforce, the next generation of men might be more engaged in that endeavor.
I think that's absolutely right. And like you point out to, people that are men that are married tip work a lot more. The labor force participation rates are much higher. Right? So this idea of like the success wins is something that like a lot of libertarians talk about, like, is it causal, is it not causal, right? And there's always going to be this big debate. But it just, to me, as an economist, I know, but it just intuitively, it makes a lot of sense that, hey, if you get married and you have kids, you're going to be more likely to work because you feel this sense of responsibility to your family. And that's what ultimately increases social mobility, right? It's like getting in the market economy, getting some kind of job. We have a million policies that get in the way of that, minimum wage policies, the benefits cliffs, we can talk about the welfare state all day, that occupational licensing, that make it much harder to get that first job and then work your way up. But like I said, at the end of the day, there's a lot of jobs out there. Get in there, and I think people will be surprised at how well they can do.
One thing that just recently has emerged from the literature that was highlighted in the Financial Times a couple days ago, I don't know if you saw it, that there's some pretty compelling research that indicates that declining fertility rates around the world correlate to the advent of smartphones. That basically everywhere where smartphones have been introduced, fertility collapses. And they've looked at even in the same country, different regions, fertility collapses. And this is a global phenomenon. So it seems like that might make the things you're talking about a lot worse, right?
Yeah, and you see with the introduction of smartphones, you obviously see anxiety increase. You also see loneliness increase. And if you poll Gen Z generations, there's a lot to be optimistic about. There's also a lot to be frightened about. For instance, the loneliness that they exhibit. If you ask Gen Z, I think there's a nice Gallup poll on it, how many close friends they have. 30-something% say they have no close friends. And so the community aspect is really shocking. And obviously, if you have no close friends, the birth rate aspect would be quite shocking. So we've obviously seen friendships decline, we've seen community decline, we've seen sex decline radically. They're not getting driver's licenses, they're not leaving their homes. And so the reverse of that, we have to reverse that quite strongly. I do like to be optimistic here, so I want to point out that Jonathan Haidt's book has had the most stunning impact of a policy book in any book that I've read in the past 15 years. I'm sure everyone has written a book, and so I apologize. But
if you haven't, you should. It's very, very
write
good.
a book. It'll surpass
Anxious
it.
American, or it's not the Anxious American. What's it called?
Generation.
The Anxious Generation.
And so I think every state has passed some version of a cell phone ban in schools. 5 years ago, it was common that there wasn't much talk throughout society about the dangers of being on your phone around your kids, or your kids being on phones constantly, and now it's ubiquitous. Now the free-range Lenore Skenezy's work is everywhere, and you could send at least in my neighborhood, you could send your kids outside on a bike without a problem. So I think there's a lot to be forward-looking. We might have lost a generation, but maybe the next generation will be fine. I'm sorry for Gen Z.
Let's switch gears to another topic that Gen Z certainly raises, which is affordability. Scott, we'll do the empty chair thing like they do in governor's debates. So Scott, the empty chair, would say if he were here that everything is basically fine, that wages have improved a lot, and so this cost of living problem that people like myself complain about is overblown. So I'm just saying that as a courtesy to Scott. I obviously, by the way I framed that, don't agree with him. I think affordability is a huge problem, especially in areas like healthcare, higher education, and broader inflation. We did a study at FREOPP a couple of years ago, co-authored by John Hartley and Jackson Mejia, that found even 2% inflation over time disproportionately harms the poor, because 2%, compounded for a generation is half of your savings goes away. 50% drawdown. So that's pretty bad. Now again, yes, if wages go up, it all works out. But when it comes to housing, healthcare, and higher education in particular, we've had massive inflation due to subsidies and other things that many of us in this room are familiar with. But leaving the statistics aside, I would just love both of your reads on that from a ground level. Talking to people who are struggling, what do they talk about when they talk about affordability? What are they struggling to afford?
Yeah, so I think housing is actually a problem. I mean, I think there's a bunch of different measures you can look at, about how big of a problem it is. I don't think housing is as unaffordable as ever been in the history of planet Earth, but certainly within the last 20 years, it is more expensive than it has been, and I think this is really creating a pinch for young people.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? Because one of the things that's interesting about housing that really gets a lot of, basically becomes very complex in housing debates, is there's kind of a division of interest among Americans. The third of Americans that own homes love the fact that houses become more expensive because it's paper wealth for them, at least they think it is. If they actually sell their home and try to buy another one, then it becomes a problem. So they love the fact that housing goes, and a lot of Federal Reserve economists and other academics say this is great. It's great that housing is becoming more expensive because there's a wealth effect from that they benefit from. But then, as you said, the people who are just entering the market, they struggle. So go ahead.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think one of the things we could do, it's funny because in this country we talk about housing and generational wealth, and I think that's half the problem, is how we frame it, rather than as a place to live, a durable consumption good. I first heard this in John Allison's book, actually, after the financial crisis. He talks about housing this way, and I think he's absolutely right. That it's a place to live. It's not an asset that you should be thinking about as like your retirement or whatever else. Because I think that leads to this like overprotection of it that you see with the NIMBYism and don't build any because we don't want our housing values to go down. Although I think a lot of that's overblown empirically, but that is certainly the mindset that a lot of people have. And then going back to the economic mobility, then this creates a problem for mobility because we've seen a lot of evidence that you want to move to places with opportunity. This is Raj Chetty's whole thing, right? Good neighborhoods with good schools, access to jobs. And if housing's really expensive there, then you're definitely keeping some people out of those neighborhoods. And I think we're seeing this bifurcation right now where, most of the people in this room doing pretty well can live in the good neighborhoods with the good schools that are safe, free from crime. And then people that aren't doing as well are stuck in these poor neighborhoods, even if they'd be willing to trade off some space, smaller space to be in the better neighborhood. We don't allow you to build apartments in those neighborhoods, and we don't allow you to build small homes in those neighborhoods. So I think there is a real access problem that does limit social mobility, for sure.
And I'll put the affordability in the context of our safety net program design and how terribly we spend our safety net dollars in our programs. So on the housing front, our housing programs are discretionary. I think we have 24 low-income housing programs spread between at least the Department of Ag and HUD. It's discretionary, it's like $60 billion, and only 1 in 4 Americans who qualify, who would be eligible for the program, actually get access to those dollars because the subsidy is so generous. We pay for all of the housing subsidy or none of it. And so we just haven't designed the housing subsidy well. And if you get the housing subsidy, it's in the worst neighborhood possible because that's only where it allows. Because it flows through the landlord. We don't give it directly to the person. So we give too much and we give it to the landlord. And the same is kind of true in how we distribute the rest of it. So higher education. Only 1/3 of Americans actually receive higher education, and it's one of our loans are one of our greatest excesses, over $1 trillion. But low-income Americans don't have access to that. And all of our workforce programs, whether it's career and technical education in K through 12, or it's our workforce programs, none of them work. There was an audit in Louisiana a couple years back, and we looked at their WIOA programs, which is our workforce program, and it found that after a low-income individual spent their time going through this program, they earned less than they did before they participated in the program. So whether it's housing or whether it's workforce, we've really just failed, and especially on healthcare. Obviously, Medicaid is our program for low-income Americans. We're dealing with tons of fraud there. But even we have destroyed healthcare because it's not a free market at any point. So if you graduate from Medicaid and you go into the ACA, then you're going to be hit with deductibles that have risen, 400% since the rise of the ACA at this point? I'm on the ACA. It's incredibly unaffordable. At every single point in which we designed our safety net, we have made it so difficult for someone who's operating in the lowest quintile to survive. We just haven't designed any of our programs to function in that environment. And we haven't designed the free market to allow them to escape up the ladder once they get even beyond the first couple rungs.
It's a beautiful segue to my next question, which is, you mentioned work requirements before, something you support. That's kind of a bumper sticker thing that a lot of FreeCons and conservatives believe. But going one level below the bumper sticker, what have you found empirically to be the most successful approaches to lifting people out of welfare? What has really worked? I know work requirements have in general work, but I mean just below that on a certain level so we can make it even more successful and potent in the future. What really works underneath that?
Yeah, so I will start with work requirements. So the ones that were passed in HR 1, they apply to able-bodied adults, those men who live in their mom's basement or they're out of work, they should go out and get a job. They are between 18 and 64, and maybe they have a child age 14 and older, and they're on Medicaid and SNAP. Apply a 20-hour week, that's a part-time job, work requirement to them. That's easy. That works for sure. They will go out, 80% of them will go out and get a job. And are
those rules enforced? Because my impression is that blue states don't enforce them.
They used to not be enforced because we had an incredible waiver that exempted 3/4 of these able-bodied adults on food stamps from it. We tightened up that waiver so only 10 counties in the United States have a waiver from them because they have an unemployment rate above 10%. So they are now enforced in SNAP. As of January 1, 2027, they will be enforced in Medicaid. Those rules will come out next month.
And how do you enforce at the federal level? How do you actually make sure the states are actually following those guidelines?
You implement a state match on their improper payment rate. So if a state, we check if they send out they send the money to the right place. And if they don't, the state general fund has to cover it. And so we created those matches.
Really interesting.
So first step, you apply work requirements. But that's not all you have to do. There are people who have serious addictions. There are people who have been in intergenerational poverty for now 4 generations since we started the safety net. You can say, yes, go out and get a job. They read at a 3rd grade level at this point. And none of our programs work. So we do have to do a lot more to help those folks out. One state I always like to point to is Utah. I worked for Senator Lee for a lot of years, and Utah's Department of Workforce Services was incredible. I would go there and be like, look at all these people getting jobs. It's amazing. And then I went around the country and I was like, oh, no one else works like this. They have 50 safety net departments in one Department of Workforce Services. And the first question that someone is asked when they come in is, what's your job to get back to work? And then safety net programs are used as work supports. Let me tell you, no other Department of Social Services in the country functions like that. And it's because federal government prevents them from doing so. So the second part is really to do that work. It's when a mom who's fleeing domestic violence or who finds herself in crisis with 2 little kids, you do treat her crisis as a crisis. And you stabilize her first and then put her on a path to be able to earn that $25 an hour she actually needs to be able to support her kids and provide childcare. It does take intensive work to get to that second point for the rest of the people. And we do have to do that work intensively.
Super interesting. Adam, how about you? What have you observed on this topic? How to lift people out of welfare?
I mean, I don't have the policy expertise that Les has, but I will say we need to just rethink the incentives around work, right? I mean, people respond to incentives. I'm an economist, so I think about it that way, right? So we got, the tax code's a mess, right? We need to be driving towards a consumption-based tax code, so we quit taxing labor income as much. That would encourage work, incentivize work. Ultimately, we have to make working better than being on the safety net, and right now, that's not a clear. It's not clearly a better choice for some people, especially at the lower income levels, on the margin, right? And so we got to refix this. We got to fix the safety net. The work requirements are a piece of it. I struggle with the work requirements, but we can debate that over beers. But I think the idea of we got to make the safety net something that's temporary, right? It's encouraging to get a job. We're providing the training to get a job. We got to have a culture that values work, that thinks there's dignity in work, that not having a job, makes you unsuccessful, right? And public shaming of people who don't want to work and aren't capable of doing it. I think right now there's too many people who think gaming the system's like a cool thing to do. That needs to not be a cool thing to do. So I think it's changing those incentives to get people to want to work, and then eliminating the barriers, right? We talked a little bit about the occupational licensing, but the benefits cliffs. Let's get the safety net and move it to I personally, going back to your point about the housing subsidies, would like to see one cash program with a phase out, so not a UBI, definitely phases out, but that people then can use, whether it's to buy housing or to help them with a car payment so they can get to their job or whatever, that simplifies some of these overlapping programs so we get rid of some of these benefits cliffs that make people not want to earn extra money on the margin or get into the labor force to begin with. So I just think there's a ton of low-hanging fruit we can do to simplify the programs and get people to value a job over whatever the alternative is, which is right now SSDI or a combination of various programs depending on the state you're in. And so I think that's a big problem.
Yeah, we have 1 minute left, and I want to ask you one last wonky question, because I know you do a lot of work in financial regulation. What are your thoughts about how access to financial services, credit, banking, how does that intersect with this topic?
Yeah, so I think do people not have bank accounts and stuff like that? We need to figure out that problem. So I don't have a ton, actually, on the financial side. I think, actually, you're the expert on the financial side of it. You should answer. I'm going to turn the question over. You tell me how you think the financial industry
oh boy, in 44 seconds, that's going to be tough. But I think, actually, I will just say there is an interesting bill coming out of the Senate Banking Committee that passed out of committee last week called the Clarity Act that that I think has a lot of interesting relevance to this topic, but we'll have to address that another time. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Les. Appreciate you doing this.
Thank you. And as we